Thinking about the future of Bitcoin, one of the things that you have to ask yourself is really about what's been happening for the last really around 60 to 120 days all around Ordinals and what the growth capacity of that might be, how it affects Bitcoin. Or is Ordinals just a fad and maybe a test case or a case study that opened up some eyes to how Bitcoin could evolve in the future? We're going to try to answer that today for you guys. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. Joining me today is Paul Sztorc, who is the founder and CEO of LayerTwo Labs. We've had him on the show before talking about this very topic well ahead of when it actually happens. So Paul, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's get into a little bit about, I just want to open up the show with talking about Ordinals in the sense of, is this a fad, a short-term lived technology experiment, or do you think this is literally going to shift the way Bitcoin responds and behaves in the future?
Well, I think basically the idea of ordinals is very old. We had NFTs before, we had a master coin, we had counterparty, we had colored coins. Even before that, Hal Finney was talking about digital collectibles, or like, and we have baseball cards. So we have normal collectibles. You have everything on if you buy a game on Steam, you earn like points. We live in a world where people are just collecting things. So the idea of human beings collecting things is definitely not a fad. It is fundamental to human nature. And so in that sense, it's not at all going away anytime soon. Will any in particular instantiation of that idea be around in 2 years? That's a completely different question. But really, when has something ever actually completely died? Like if I think of something as a fad, that's like there's a time when no one does it, then everyone does it, and then it goes back to no one doing it. But I don't think that that's going to happen with this. I think
Okay. Well, I was looking
people will
at
still be doing this in some form, and in many forms, and it will probably grow the wide
continue to
variety
kind
of
of
ways of people doing things.
more fun and stuff.
Right.
I mean, we're over 10 million inscriptions now to date. Obviously, you can see a little bit of a jump, and then we've also seen a kind of a bit of a regress here as well. And even if you look at that, and even into the marketplaces, I was just looking at a little bit here. Obviously, Magic Eden, one of the big winners there, along with Unisat, et cetera. And then, of course, Bitcoin has had some of its own increase in total value as well as use case. Good for the miners, so there are some positives that come out of this. Obviously, just coming off the Bitcoin conference here in Miami. What is your position right now when you look, as you and I talked about this the last time you were on the show, and that is kind of the definition of what was happening from the Bitcoin Maxi community and what was happening within what we're seeing right now, which is the Ordinals community. And both of those are starting to conflict a little bit. We're seeing some people starting to move in that direction, the others kind of unifying. Do you feel like this is a good thing for Bitcoin going forward, or is this something that is going to continue to kind of split the contingent?
Well, there's one sense in which it does represent progress, I think, which is it is teaching people a lot of things that are commonly dismissed or just not understood. So the idea that the miners should be maximizing their revenue, and whoever's buying the block space for whatever reason, if they're willing to pay, then they are the rightful owner of the block space. This is still considered to be a very contentious idea and very controversial, and they'll quote standardness rules in the Bitcoin protocol, or things, quotes from Satoshi where he says that he will write code to stop certain kinds of messages from being broadcast across the Bitcoin network in order to discourage people from misusing it. So people quote this and that, but at the end of the day, there is no way of stopping the block from being sold to the highest bidder. And if people want to use that space for something, that they will, and they'll outbid. And then all the attempts to get around that introduce all these other kinds of headaches, such as there being no public mempool and there are no publicly verifiable fee data. So all of those things are not great. So in a sense of teaching people that we need to care about how much it costs. The miners are going to revenue maximize, but they'll also, the idea that you can basically buy all the space in the block, like that one
Right.
4 megabyte ordinal. It says, well, I pay this amount to the miners, and now I own this block, and now I control what's in it. And if I want to just put one picture in there, then no one's going to stop me. So that's another thing. The idea of the security budget of like how much is being spent on fees per 10 minutes is how much it costs to disable Bitcoin temporarily. So people are now being forced to learn these things in a way that in the past it was very like analytical and like hypothetical, theoretical, and kind of confusing. But now it's just like, okay, whatever. Nick Carter and Udi paid $4,000. They filled the block with one picture or whatever it is that they did. Now everyone knows that, okay, $4,000 is the going rate to just buy a block. So things in the past that took a lot of explaining are now easier to understand. The biggest and most significant is, of course, the ongoing culture of, I think, what you call the Bitcoin Maxis. It's interesting that, I mean, from my point of view, that's something where I've been standing in the same spot for 10 years, and the Bitcoin Maxi camp has kind of like moved around and is now very different. That label now means something a little more different. Now that label is something that I would kind of reject, and I would say that the Bitcoin Maxi idea is something that pushes complacency and overconfidence with respect to Bitcoin's future. That's not what it meant in the past. In the past, it just meant that you thought Bitcoin would win. You thought it's all open source software, so we'll just copy anything that someone writes. Every second coin is just superfluous distraction. Now it's kind of different. Now it just says the Maxi idea is more, no matter how complacent we are, and no matter how many mistakes we make, and no matter how innovative other people are, or how creative they are, or how many things they just try, how many times they roll the dice, the BTC asset will always win, despite all that, which is almost the opposite meaning of what it had in the past.
I mean, Taproot obviously had.
We have to crush that idea. Sorry to I have to finish this thought though, which is we have to that idea of complacency, or that everyone is happy in BTC and everything else is just a scam. And now this idea this is so new that it has necessarily challenged that, because people now have to decide, is Casey, the inventor of Ordinals and inscriptions, is he a Bitcoiner? He sort of seems like he is, because he hates altcoins, and he went on Matt Odell's show or whatever. So it's kind of, he really seems like he is, and yet he has made a non-Bitcoin asset. And it's like, is this homage to Bitcoin? Is this homage to colored coins? Is it being built on Bitcoin, or is it not? So now since this is new, it didn't fit into the pre-existing like stable, static culture, the Maxi kind of cult culture. There was no like talking point for it. And as a result, people have to use their brains to think about what it actually means. And you cannot be in a cult if you are using your brain. So it's killing the cult. That's the good part.
Interesting. A couple of things happening right now. Some people look at this Ordinals now threatening maybe Ethereum's NFTs with this new BRC-721E component. Mainly, what it's telling us is that we're seeing just as much activity now within Ordinals. I think it's number one or number two now, as we've seen with Ethereum, Solana, and some other chains out there. Do you think that can hold in the sense of innovation happening within the Bitcoin blockchain, or do you feel like this is something that's going to see a spike and we're probably just going to come back to a normalized volume level?
Well, it's an example of the old Maxi idea of like anything that's invented somewhere else that people like, we can just redo in Bitcoin. So it's like, Ethereum is doing all these assets, and now we're saying, well, we also will do that. The idea that Bitcoin will have its own, BRC-20 is explicitly, even the name is riffing on that idea, So it's like, this is the old idea. I think, if the end demand is there, it's going to be very hard if there's like someone wants to buy something, someone wants to sell it, and someone wants to write the code, and the miner wants to mine the transaction. If this is like a wholly consensual team of people, I don't know how that will be stopped in the long run. Although in the short run, it can be held up, of course.
Yeah.
So I think that's the story, is just that people do like to collect things. They will continue to explore this idea. Some people will use it to, take advantage of people and make a lot of money. And I think this is hardly the worst scam, though. I mean,
Yeah.
much of the worst, many things were way, way worse than what a lot of this has going for it is it's overtly claims to just be like a piece of art or something. If we live
Hmm.
in the world where we have the Art Basel banana with duct tape, or you live in a world that has Pokemon cards or baseball cards, then it's kind of like this is very honest and
Hmm.
transparent about being nothing. Whereas in the past we had a lot of other stuff, the ICOs and other things which were much more dishonest, or they misrepresented themselves in like a very fundamental way. So I think yeah, certainly will if it goes to show, because you asked does it challenge Ethereum, and so the idea is like the old Maxi idea of like this is all open source software, so we'll just take anything that is cool that is invented somewhere else and we'll put it on Bitcoin, which is the old idea. So I hope that old idea
Hmm.
comes back. The exact form it takes might take some engineering and some tinkering.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at the NFT sales volume, obviously Bitcoin wasn't even on the chart. Now you've got them right
Right.
behind, Bitcoin in general, right behind Ethereum, and then Polygon above, and Solana, Immutable, even BNB. So, I mean, this to me is a serious scenario playing out. Now, again, this gets back to the point of if we're looking at long term for NFTs and, inscriptions, what does that look like in the future? Could we see more expansion, more obvious creativity starting to work within this? This was a big conversation at the Bitcoin Miami conference, and I think a lot of people were kind of split down. I wouldn't say split down the middle, but I would say most people were for this in terms of advancing Bitcoin in general, just opening up the ideas, to your point. But there's a handful of people that were extremely against this idea as a whole. When you think about that, what do you feel are the things that have to happen over the next 18 months before we get into the next happening for maybe Bitcoin to be something different? Let's talk about that.
Well, I think that the longer we wait, the world continues to change around us. Not to be so platitudinous, but it's like in the past, the like if you had done this chart of like whatever NFT volume or something, if you'd done that like
Right.
8 years ago, none of those other things had existed at all. And there
Sure.
was counterparty and colored coins and things on BTC. So it would be BTC 100%. And then we went through a period where that shrank. But Bitcoin went from a period where the altcoins had this tiny amount of regard, which was 100% appropriate because they were all useless scams and terrible ideas. And over time, many of the new ideas have gotten like better and better. And we in the Bitcoin community have gone through like an inflection point of like sour grapes,
Hmm.
where at first people were kind of afraid. We were like, what do we do about we would have conversations about, oh, Bitcoin versus Ethereum, like 2015, 2016, people would say Bitcoin versus Ethereum. But then there was a
Right.
time when it was like, we can never even bring that up. Don't, he who must not be named type of a thing. And then, but it's like, as they get more popular, people in Bitcoin will say, oh, I never wanted that anyway. Sour grapes type of a thing. The reaction becomes stronger, and
Yeah.
the determination to dismiss it becomes stronger. So I think as time passes, that golf continues to get wider and wider, and there are more and more people who just they find it untenable, the situation,
Hmm.
that they find it untenable that there would be so much stuff happening, like a ZK snark technology, or just people goofing around. Um, and also like the realities, like the Bitcoin has a kind of aspirational goal to like replace every transaction in the world and every form of money with the
Hmm.
Bitcoin transaction and with BTC. And every day that doesn't happen forces people to ask like why, and then they think, well, it's just because Michael Saylor hasn't told enough people about it yet, and then it's kind of like, is that true? And then they'll use Bitcoin wallet, or they'll use the Lightning wallet, or they'll use whatever it is, and
Yeah,
they will
sure.
then see that we don't have everything 100% figured out. Like if the legacy financial system collapsed tomorrow completely, would Bitcoin be ready to take over for all of that? The answer is no, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
people, they face that reality and they say, that plays into your question about like what's it going to take to like it'll be just people, it'll be stuff like this. People will be frustrated with something, they will want to make a change, and they'll decide the only way I can make this change is by going to Miami wearing a Wizards costume and whatever, making Wizards happen. So I think that's like the fact that it took that form, that shows you that what is happening is that actually right now it's a case where Twitter or mob mentality is more in charge. The pendulum swings back and forth, but there's like
I would agree.
elites and and then there's like people on Twitter who may not be real. They may be bots controlled by one person, or they may just be 16-year-olds or younger, or they may be just people who have been persuaded, they have been persuaded to do certain things. You probably know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, we see this all the time, these Twitter swarms that kind of brew up on pretty much any kind of project out there. So it is a commonality within it. And, I look at the BRC-20 token list right here, total market cap continuing to grow here, but a lot of real scam coins. I mean, these are scam projects, left and right. And again, all of this spawned essentially from what's happening within the ordinal space. So people jumping on the bandwagon, does this not give Bitcoin, or in general the blockchain, a bad look or a black eye when we see this kind of, and not that this doesn't happen in other industries, because we do, but there is a certain threshold to entry here that is lacking that allows for pretty much anybody to spin these up. What is going to stop that, number one? And two, is there something from a technical standpoint that could help this go out the right way in terms of how Bitcoin could react to its future and get to your point right there that you mentioned, and that is prepared for the world's financial system in the next decade?
Yes. So I think what I would prefer, the ideal thing, because I think you're right, like the idea of does something in the industry make Bitcoin look bad? I mean, that ship has like been sailed a lot, but that happens all the time. Like the industry is so bad, and it's 99% scams, which is horrible. It's horrible to be in the industry because and then of course anyone who's doing a scam, they employ like the best sociopaths, and they buy advertising. So the regular normal person that you'd meet at a Thanksgiving dinner, they've heard of the scams, and they've heard of the really bizarre YouTubers or something.
Yep.
And so the industry is not good, and it is not a good thing that the barriers to entry are low, and someone can make a lot of money by that they can just swap for untraceable eCash. And so that is it's very important that somehow people talk about that all the time.
Exactly.
It would be really nice to try and have some, and that is part of what the Cyber Hornet, like toxic maxi defense, is partly about that, because to address that problem, because this problem is very real, and so that's a real part of the solution. Well, it's the best.
Exactly, and it's exactly what our show does a lot, is to try to, one, make people aware that there is a lot of bad stuff in the industry. This is a very nascent and growing industry, so I expect it, from a technology standpoint. But there's also these gems. There's these certain aspects of this industry that will do some great things out there. The key is can you stick around? We've seen it in this other tech phases outside of blockchain, so it's not something new. But I think a lot of people that are new to the space, they do see the bad versus what the good is. So it is something that we're constantly, on top of. I want to go over to a video that I'm not going to play the video, but I want to just get your, where you were going with this. This was the ETH side as a side chain, Ethereum. Talk to me about what this means and how does this affect, kind of Bitcoin itself. But first of all, give us a framework of what you're talking about here.
This is, if you are a Bitcoiner, this is a layer 2. So it's like Lightning Network is a layer 2. This is a layer 2 chain that just is basically a copy of a clone of Ethereum. So there's no ether there.
Yep.
There's no rival asset. But in fact, it starts with 0 coins on day one. But you can deposit your Bitcoin over there. Once we have a soft fork upgrade to Bitcoin called the BIP-300, you can deposit Bitcoin there, and then anything you were doing on Ethereum, you can just do using BTC, and there's no need for the rival asset. So it's a completely different piece of software. It's a completely different blockchain, but it is the same asset, the same 21 million Bitcoin.
Would this solve the fees problem that we experience over on Ethereum? Would that be solved with a sidechain here like this?
Yes, it happens to solve many different problems. The biggest problem it solves is that people disagree over what the blockchain should contain. And the Ordinals is a perfect example of that. The block size is an example of that. The whole fact that Ethereum exists at all, Turing-complete state script situation is that was, all those people were, Roger Ver was obviously BTC Bitcoiner. Vitalik was co-founder of Bitcoin Magazine. The fact that, it solves, so this idea solves quite a bit because you now have different competing versions of software that all use the same 21 million Bitcoin. And so that's obviously kind of big. It happens to also solve the fees situation because you can just stamp out horizontally, once the one Ethereum layer 2 fills up and its fees start to rise, you can just make a second one and then a third one and a fourth one. And so, so it allows people to have the fee rates per transaction can be low, and the total fees collected across all the chains going to one group of miners, that can be high and that can grow logarithmically.
Yeah.
Forever.
What holds us back, Paul, from really that kind of environment becoming reality, of being able to utilize Bitcoin in those fashions, which would change the dynamic of how that asset is essentially, utilized? What would hold us back from that?
Well, I have a proposal, BIP-300, and this takes a lot of time, and it didn't used to, but in the past, so I think Segwit took something like 20 months, and Taproot took 46 months. So this has been slowing over time. But I think this era of the slow soft fork may also be coming to an end. But there's a lot of historical context with that, and partially it was self-reinforcing because as they became slower, each of one became more and more of a big event. Back in 2015, you could do like 3 per quarter, and it was not seen as like a big deal. But there was this SegWit blockade, and this made everyone super pissed off, basically. And so the idea of doing a soft fork became very controversial. But yeah, if we had this soft fork, then you would have different chains for different things, and you could even fix the sort of scam situation and the ordinal situation kind of in one go, because you would have this bit assets sidechain that would do its own NFC, BRC-20, whatever you want to call them. They would do them over there, and that would not be clogging up layer 1, but it would still be increasing miners' revenues, and it would still be giving people what they want, and it would also even be teaching people a little bit. They would say, because that thing would pay transaction fees in Bitcoin, even though it would issue assets that were different. They would not be BTC, you'd issue whatever, like 1 million TechPath coin or something, and now you pay the transaction fee in BTC, but there'd be this different type of coin would appear. And that would, I think, teach people. That would say, okay, this is a coin that is itself on top of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the thing that lets us also have the coin market, which would be like a stock market or a bond market, or just an art market or something. So that would be very tidy.
Well, it's definitely a different approach, I think, which again gets back to the kind of the culture that has been spawned from the last 5 to 8 years with Bitcoin, obviously evolving to much like what you and I have talked about before. With that being said, I wanted to jump over to Charles Hoskinson. His was a scenario kind of similarly to this. So he's basically talking about Bitcoin ordinals. Maybe it should be over on Cardano. And there's a lot of that, whether you like, Cardano, you don't like the Cardano, not really our position. But what are your thoughts on different leaders and visionaries kind of within the industry kind of going at this problem like this of just saying, hey, let's just jump chains?
Well, if it's like live by the fork or die by the fork used to be a
Yeah.
saying about why a hard fork would never be viable in Bitcoin, because if you
Hmm.
jump ship once, then all you got are the most disloyal people, and they'll
Hmm.
jump ship again. And then there was Bitcoin, and then there was like Litecoin, and then there was like Feathercoin, and then there was like Dustcoin, and it's just this endless scree plot of people defecting out of the coalition. It does need a little bit of teamwork. Network effects are real. Metcalfe's law is real. Network effects and money are real. Charles Hodgkinson, he recognizes that there's economic activity here, and he wants that on his chain. So
Yeah.
that is a clue that everyone should want it, and is
Yeah.
also a clue that when this type of activity was being suppressed in Bitcoin in like 2014, deliberately suppressed and chased out, that was probably a big mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, imagine where we would be now had this, the evolution of this really gotten hold back in the, 2014, 15, and really kind of evolved to where who knows what would be happening within Bitcoin as it goes forward. All right. So your proposal is that there's a possibility that we could see a sidechain something like this in the future. This would be one of the scenarios that could move us forward around this, especially if you're looking at whether it's collectibles or other assets that could be riding on side chains. That's really kind of the solution of LayerTwo Labs. Are you still receiving a lot of pushback after what we saw in Miami?
Well, overall, things have been going a lot better. So we started the company with the mission of like advancing the technology and communicating better, and we had like a big booth there. We had like
Yeah.
funny pinatas of different altcoins, and so we were having fun. We gave away a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff. We gave away shirts and things. We gave away we gave away shot glasses. So I think we were bribing people with stuff, but we're canvassing like elite support. So we have like layer2labs.com/friends. We have like a list of supporters.
Okay.
So that's going pretty well. I think in general it's going well. It's just slow going. It's that saying about politics is the slow boring of hard boards or something like that. So yeah, it's just it's going. I think it's going. We have like exponentially increasing support, but it's still not overwhelming. But I think that has been changing a lot. We had a lot of important people visit the booth, and they were happy to take photos. They were happy to tweet
Yeah.
of their own volition. So we have a lot of big supporters on the elite list. We're doing some grassroots support. The Ordinals thing kind of helps because it shakes up the idea that we don't have to do anything. This false idea that we can be complacent and we don't have to do
Yeah.
anything. So that
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm looking at this. When we had a chance to talk the first time, it was pre-Ordinals, the breakout, so to speak. I think that does change a little bit about the dynamics. So maybe with LayerTwo Labs and your efforts, this will look a little different, 6 months or 12 months from now, as we start to see a lot more openness around how Bitcoin is going to essentially be utilized for the future. Paul, it's been great having you back on the show today. We appreciate, of course. I'm going to be watching, of course, what's happening with LayerTwo Labs over the next year or so. I think this is going to be a very interesting cycle as we get into this next happening. But thanks for stopping in today. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You bet. All right, so you guys are tuned in maybe on the podcast side of things right now. Make sure and jump over to the YouTube channel. We do a lot of breakdowns and deep dives, maybe other things that you're trying to learn about Bitcoin right now or Ordinals in general. The key here is to hopefully give you guys a bigger breadth of not only information, but viewpoints. And that's the thing that you have to really take out there into the market if you're looking at crypto and in general blockchain. Make sure, and of course, just subscribe to the channel. Just click that bell. You get notifications. We do live streams, all that good stuff. Make sure and jump into the Diamond Circle. It's our free email list, and it's also another place where we drop additional content. And if you guys want to reach me, it is out there on Twitter at Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.